At the beginning of the 20th century, the theatre-going public in Russia was presented with a continual series of classic favourites: Gogol, Pushkin, Ostrovsky, Turgenev, and adaptations of Dostoevsky. The text of the play and the actor's rendition of the text were paramount. Naturalistic set designs were standard. After a series of repressive measures introduced by the government, people turned away from politics, and this was reflected in the arts. From 1910 onwards, there developed an antipathy among Russian theatrical innovators to all literature, including the classics, and even the written word in general. Theatre directors like Meyerhold had already voiced the opinion that a new kind of theatre would be brought into the world by a new kind of literature. They became interested in wordless action because it created the possibility of a theatre independent of literature altogether. The first futurist theatre was staged at the Luna Park in St. Petersburg in 1912. Mayakovsky wrote his first theatrical work, Vladimir Mayakovsky, A Tragedy. The production intended to bring back the actor in its pure form, the fairground buffoon, who introduces himself, performing and interacting with the audience, and giving a running commentary on the action. All the characters are Mayakovsky himself, the man without a head, the man with one eye, the man with one leg, the man with one ear, and the man with two kisses. The difficulty consisted of how actors were to play such roles. A simple solution was devised. The actors moved around holding cardboard figures of their respective characters in front of them, speaking the lines as they look out from behind the figures of Mayakovsky's imagination. Victory Over the Sun was an opera written by Matushin and Kruchenik, with sets by Malevich, who daringly applied the principles of cubism, or suprematism, noticeable for their strict geometric and non-representational qualities. The extravagant costumes of the characters and the set design were the remarkable features of the production, rather than the music and the actual performance. The costumes were intended to embody a robotic military character, and according to Matushin, were supposed to prophesy the end of future wars. Meyerhold was at this time still involved with symbolist drama, but was making new discoveries with the spatial elements of the stage, freely improvising with the proscenium and experimenting with light. The Life of a Man was the first instance in Russia when lighting was used to construct space to define the dominant style of the performance, rather than scenery. Meyerhold defined it as area lighting. With the staging of Alexander Blok's The Show Booth in 1906, Meyerhold gave a demonstration of his stage device. The simple archaic theatre encompassed the Commedia dell'arte of Italy, elements of the traditional Japanese stage performance, and the old theatres of Spain and England, a theatre of masks. Meyerhold realised in the show booth's theatre within a theatre the potential of the deliberate exposure of theatrical illusion. The set was non-realistic, and was lowered and raised in full view of the audience. Meyerhold, with the set designer Galovin, began to work on a version of Lermontov's play Masquerade. They challenged the idea of the fourth wall, an important premise of the Moscow Art Theatre, attempting to establish instead a special relationship between stage and house by steering the audience's perceptions through musical analogy. The curtains were intended to play the part of an overture, of orchestral interludes, and as tragic coda. The first curtain in black and red, with emblems of playing cards, introduced the performance before it began. One critic described Masquerade as an opera without music. Meyerhold searched and found the equivalent in gesture for every fluctuation of emotion, acting without words, but which could be understood by an audience. The performance was dictated by observing rhythms in the text, shifts in the stage area envisaged beforehand, and thirdly, body movement as signs within each separate emotional movement, similar to punctuation marks. The audience may or may not see these signs. They corresponded to a fixed rhythm governed by the director, and the actor's freedom was subordinated to them. To continue the musical analogy, the score not only prompted the right emotion in the actor, but created a space for it, giving it free rein. The theatrical decor deliberately emphasized the tragic inevitability of the character's fate. Here in the acting style of Masquerade was the seed for the future concept of a new type of acting, biomechanics. It declared itself after the Revolution in completely new types of productions. Unlike Masquerade with its sense of fatality and carnival atmosphere. Meyerhold became interested in cubist and non-representational geometric art, which avant-garde artists like Popova, Rozanova and others were painting. With its emphasis on spatial extension and experiments with form, It opened up new possibilities for solving some of Meyerhold's concerns of combining the three-dimensional figures of actors with the flat surface of painting and set design. In the play The Dawn, we can see the first evidence of Meyerhold's use of avant-garde design in set and stage construction. The art design of The Dawn was Dmitriev, who constructed an abstract set in a cubist style, over which was hung two yellow triangular shapes and an iron cone. The placard style of the play was intended to reach out to an audience directly, instead of providing a motif or a representation. It was intended to break up the traditional visual elements of theatre and open up the awareness of the actors to the audience and the audience to the actors. Meyerhold introduced changes to the Belgian poet Verhaaren's symbolist play to bring the play closer to the circumstances of the Civil War and other events which made up the news of the day. During the performance of The Dawn on the 18th of November 1920, the news of the taking of Perikop was announced. Meyerhold read out the telegram from the stage, announcing victory over the enemy, substituting it for the herald's line. From this time on, roster communiques were no longer posted in the corridors, but were read out during each performance. The revolution demanded new plays for a new era. With it came a change in the type of audience who attended the theatre. Before the revolution, the theatre was the domain of the middle and upper strata of society. Now it had to cater to factory workers, soldiers, and former peasants seeking education and enlightenment. Mystery Bouffe, styled in the fashion of a medieval mystery play, was the first collaboration between Mayakovsky and Meyerhold. The prologue sounded like a proclamation to elevate theatre. A revolution in life unavoidably entails a revolution in art and language. To proclaim this was necessary to those artists who wished to renew the world. The plot of Mystery Bouffe was disarmingly simple. A flood has overwhelmed the world, leaving only the North Pole above the surface of the waters. The survivors consist of 7 pairs of clean and 7 pairs of unclean. The clean are typical representatives of the capitalist world. The unclean are the workers of the world, united in adversity. They include a miner, a lamplighter, a carpenter, and a laundress. Meyerhold's theatre required a new energy to reflect a new dynamic future, which many believed communism would bring. Therefore, he needed a new type of play. Mayakovsky was his greatest hope. Meyerhold was convinced that the theatre was in a unique position to give a lead to a new society. The old theatrical forms were not able to do this, as they reflected a social order which was passing into history. Social conditions of the early 20th century required a new means of expression more appropriate to the times. In Mystery Bouffe, the question of the connection of art with politics became decisive. One of the key elements in this process was the position of the actor in theatre. Because circus conventions are physical and presentational as opposed to verbal and narrative, they easily lent themselves to the purposes of directors such as Meyerhold. He wished to move away from a theatre dominated by the word and refined manners, towards a theatre which had its original sources among fairground and street entertainers, and who were closer to the great mass of people to whom Meyerhold wished to reach out, and whose art was visual and physically energetic. The principle upon which Meyerhold's actors based their performing technique became known as biomechanics. In the art of the actor, he said, is the art of sculptural forms in space, meaning the art of the actor is the ability to utilize the expressive potential of their body. The path to the image must begin not from emotional experience, not from within, but from without, from movement. Moreover, any movement, the tilt of the head, the turn of the body, the smallest gesture, should ideally involve the whole body of the performer, who possesses musical rhythm and quick, reflexive excitability. According to biomechanical theory, every movement must not be simply realistic or lifelike, but deliberate, and in particular, responsive to the movement of the partner. Emotion revealed its dynamic framework. The moment of appearance, the development, the rising and falling, the culmination, the exhaustion. Meyerhold turned rhythm into a component of the performance, which created content as well as form. In expounding biomechanics, Meyerhold contrasted it with the Moscow Art Theatre system for training actors. It brought the actor to the very center of the director's composition. Biomechanics allows the actor, perfectly controlling body and movement, to be expressive in dialogue, secondly, to be the master of the theatrical space, thirdly, in integrating with the crowd scene, the grouping, to impart to it energy and will. It was in the magnanimous Cookhold that the new method was revealed to the public for the first time. Lyubov Popova designed the sets and the costumes. In the magnanimous Cookhold, rhythm was everything. When the actors first stepped onto Popova's machine, they found themselves in a completely unfamiliar environment, cut off from all help. There was no decor, costumes, or makeup for them to fall back on. Every movement, whether intended or not, acquired sculptural form and significance. In the rhythmic mechanization and circus-like athleticism of Meyerhold's whole creation could be seen a prototype for the future, cleansed of passions not subject to the intellect. Meyerhold was strongly influenced by Eastern drama and the Japanese theatre kabuki, and its principles of stage direction, which indicate or suggest a place rather than showing it. He attempted to create an analogous system for Soviet-Russian audiences of the 1920s, using the technology of kabuki theatre and synthesizing it with contemporary innovations, rather than employ Japanese signs, music, color symbolism, and costume as exotica. What captured Meyerhold's interest was not the beauty of kabuki, but rather its ability to externalize the character's emotions or state of mind through the rhythm of the actor's body movement. The basis of the kabuki actor's technique is dance, and its essence is a series of gestures, each of which contains a specific meaning. Kabuki converts words into gestures. It stresses the dynamic tension of poses. It moves from pose to pose. Meyerhold collaborated with the constructivist artist Varvara Stepanova to build the set and design for the costumes for his next production, The Death of Tarelkin, one of Meyerhold's favorite plays. Meyerhold continued to experiment in the sphere of the circusization of theatre and produced the gloomy play in a spirit of light-hearted clowning. Stepanova proposed, instead of a whole machine that Popova designed for the magnanimous cookhold, a collection of various apparatuses, large and small, arranged separately on the stage. They were like ordinary furniture, but had a life of their own, firing shots when sat upon, and jumped when the sitter arose. A huge meat grinder was the police torture chamber. The actors swaggered about the stage, clowning, throwing multicolored balls into the audience, and fighting amongst themselves, even swinging out on swings over the first row of stalls. The significance of the visual clues, such as the character's makeup and costume, communicate everything from social standing, gender, age, and mood, in a theatrical scheme of social masks. Among Meyerhold's assistants in the production of Tarelkin's death was the young Sergei Eisenstein. He staged his own production called The Wise Man from Ostrovsky's play. His production was the apogee of the circusization of theatre, with tightrope walking, acrobatics and somersaults on the ground and in the air, executed with full professional panache. An epoch of constructivism in the Russian theatre followed from Meyerhold's experiments. It was conceived as a means of breaking up the old naturalistic theatre, to do away with stereotyped audience expectations. Constructivism and the avant-garde seemed to offer him a solution. An early proponent of this trend was Tairov, who staged an adaptation of The Man Who Was Thursday in 1923. Clearly inspired by Meyerhold, the costumes showed the latest Western fashions. Tairov and the artist Vesin erected a massive construction with moving lifts and pavements, lights and adverts. the whole effect was not entirely successful. The actors felt crowded on stage in the cramped space offered by the set built by Wesson. Meyerhold's theatre, on Triumphalная Square, in the former Theatre Zone, became the centre of opposition to what is now termed the Stanislavski system of acting. The debate illustrated in a simplified form some of the theatrical issues which dominated the early part of the 20th century, questions which have surrounded acting since Aristotle wrote the Poetics. Which reveals the actor's truth, the mask or the face? Stanislavski and the Moscow Art Theatre were concerned with the role of the actor in presenting the sincerity and truth of emotions and the idea of a process, a combination of techniques with which to mobilize the potential of the actor's creative nature to guarantee them the truth of feeling and authenticity of the stage experience. Stanislavski wanted to bring a new kind of actor's realism to the theatre. Meyerhold's idea of reality in the theatre was to show the theatricality of theatre as much as possible, and this had implications for the actor's relation to a given production. In a sense, both were concerned with the externalization of the inner state or truth of the actor in relation to themselves, the play, and the social and political context of the day. For Meyerhold, realism was not necessarily identical with truth. His contention was that when the audience enters the theatre, they already know this is not a real situation, that what they are about to see is not real life, and not a means of copying the real world and representing it on the stage. Hence the break with naturalistic methods of representing reality in the theatre and the search for new theatrical forms. On December 9, 1926, Meyerhold staged a new production of The Government Inspector. The production was controversial, in that Meyerhold styled himself as co-author in a completely unorthodox version, which introduced new lines and characters not written by Gogol, or lines and characters from Gogol's other plays. As Mikhail Chekhov observed, Meyerhold showed us something else, a world, a fullness of content which drew into itself a domain of such large proportions, where the government inspector is only a part, only a separate sound of the whole melody. People like Nikolai Petrov believed that Meyerhold had not abandoned the revolution, but the revolution was continuing, a revolution at the very roots of theatrical art. As Meyerhold himself put it, just because we are not running around the stage with red flags, placards and slogans, it doesn't mean the government inspector is not revolutionary. Lunacharsky hailed the government inspector as Meyerhold's return to traditional classical drama. He either failed to see or deliberately ignored the innovative quality of the production. Meyerhold moved the action from the provinces to urban Moscow and played the production as a tragedy. In the context of Meyerhold's interpretation of the government inspector, analogies with the cinema are common. There is a density of shortened scenes. It was not presented in one long staging, but a whole episode would be squeezed into the narrow frame of a scene, giving a close-up of the action. The principle of a contrasting edit was applied where the action spills across the entire width of the stage. In the final scene, actors are required to freeze into poses at the end of the play, like shop dummies, to represent in Gogol's play the ossified and fossilized nature of the society which is meant to be portrayed. This sometimes presented actors and directors with problems, and often didn't work. Meyerhold solved this problem by having real mannequins made, dressed and substituted for the actors. Meyerhold's Cavalier version of Ostrovsky's The Forest in 1924 turned out to be one of the most famous productions of the 1920s. Meyerhold broke the play up into 33 episodes, changing their order and completely disregarding the sequence in which the play had originally been written. He adapted the classical play to contemporary issues and topical problems. His production was once again strongly influenced by the tradition of popular fairground theatre and incorporated devices of the circus and the cinema. In The Forest, there emerged a cheerful theatre of social masks. The attitude to each character was determined by the character's class origins. Landowners, merchants, clergymen were mocked furiously. The poor and the penniless evoked sympathy. The satirical hyperboles in The Forest went hand in hand with lyricism. The Bedbug, written in 1928, was a fierce satire on communist bureaucracy. The play was divided into two parts, the present and the future. It required several set designers. The Kikrinsky group for the present day, and Alexander Rodchenko designed the episode set in the future. A young Shostakovich wrote the score. The proletarian hero Ivan Prisipkin possesses all the virtues of a Soviet bureaucrat, an ignorant vulgarian loudly protesting his loyalty to the common cause. He has calloused hands, a party card, a trade union card, a vulgar manner, and continually scratches himself, drinks large quantities of vodka, and strums the guitar. He is to wed Elvius Renaissance. However, the marriage feast ends abruptly when the bride's veil catches fire and all the wedding guests perish in the conflagration. 50 years later, communism has been established across the globe. Workmen excavating on the site of the wedding feast discover Prisipkin frozen in a block of ice in the cellar. The Institute of Human Resurrection agrees to restore him to life. Prisipkin's corpse is revived. So is the bedbug, his alter ego, which accompanies him loyally in death. The authorities, having no further use for him, present him to the local zoo, where he inhabits a cage labelled Philistinius vulgaris. From the moment he is resurrected, Prisipkin proves to be a rebel against the new communist state. He wants to play the guitar, sing romantic songs, drink, curse, and make love. But the frailties of a former age are no longer encouraged by the communist rulers. Though a comedy, Prisipkin is a tragic and prophetic hero. Mayakovsky was perfectly aware there was a great deal of Prisipkin in him. He took care that the actor Ilinsky, who played the role, should look and behave as much as possible like his creator, even adopting the same mannerisms and raucous voice. Mayakovsky was sending up Mayakovsky, and at the same time he was sending up the Soviet state, which had produced so many Prisipkins. The theme of satire was continued more intensely in the utopian Bathhouse. In his staging of Mayakovsky's play, Meyerhold made no changes whatsoever, and to the astonishment of many critics, compared Mayakovsky to Molière, Pushkin, and Gogol. Chudakov, the wonder worker, has invented a machine for taking people into the future. Unable to convince the authorities to finance the project, he shows it to the dictator, Pobedonosico, meaning nose for victory. The machine explodes, and the phosphorescent woman, played by Zinaida Reich, appears having emerged from the machine from the year 2003. The dictator becomes convinced that the expedition to the future is worthwhile. However, he makes it absolutely clear that he will rule with the same bureaucratic procedures as he has in the past. The bureaucrat formed under the new social conditions is no different from any head of a civil service department in Gogol or Shchedrin. The essence is old, the words and language new. New language entails new forms. As such, language has a revolutionary character of its own. This was Mayakovsky's unique insight. As a poet and a playwright, he freely discerned the relationship between language, literature, and social change, and the fraught tension between politics and art. Meyerhold saw the expanse of physical space as an emotionally charged compositional entity. We have his description of Moscow by night. Particularly struck by one visual impression, he wrote, "I still remember a city square which seemed to slope because there was a single street lamp burning on one of its corners. The arc side seemed to crumble. its edges disappearing in the dark. One of Meyerhold's cherished concepts of space was theatre in the round, an arena stage encircled by an amphitheatre for the audience. The model for I Want a Child was a materialization of the concept of theatre in the round. The performances were intended to include public debates, with speakers from the audience taking the floor both during and after the play. In the late 1920s, Meyerhold discussed the project of the new team building with two young architects, Mikhail Bakhin and Sergei Vakhtangov. His purpose was to do away with traditional theatrical attributes like the footlights and the division of the playhouse into different prestige areas. The two architects were able to fit both the new building of team and the premises for its workshop into the narrow space between the walls of the former Zon Theatre. The new structure was to be vertically dominated by a tower, with premises for stage directors, set designers, composers, playwrights, and research sections. The audience would sit in a steeply rising amphitheatre, enclosed on three sides, level with the first row seats. The stage, jutting out sharply into the auditorium, was to be fitted with two circular platforms. The one backstage was to have a diameter of 15 meters, the other of 10 meters. The two revolving arenas could go down for a change of scenery or go up to accommodate vertical arrangements of stage action. In 1933, however, the Moscow city administration took a dislike to the appearance of the new building. Meyerhold put up a fierce defense of the project. Meyerhold wanted his new theatre to epitomize his long creative quest. He wanted the new building to represent his own concept of the theatre, which he worked so hard to realize. Despite the obstacles placed in his path, Meyerhold continued to create new and ever-changing theatre. The reverberations of his innovations and experiments in theatre, acting techniques and set design, were felt down through the 20th century, and his influence lived on in artists of world theatre who took their cue from the great master.